All right, folks, welcome back to Green Pill, where we focus on making health simple for you, but more importantly, for your family, loved ones, and community. You'll see I'm wearing my blue light blocking glasses today because this episode is with Chuck Hazzard. Chuck is a wearable expert, the best one I know on the future of medicine, biometrics, testing, measuring, athletics, and really Chuck has his pulse on on what's coming down the pipe in terms of digital medicine. So Chuck's background's super interesting. He started his career at IBM. He then, for some reason, decided to become a lawyer and ran GWI, a telecom company, growing it from about 330,000 revenue to 12 million a year with a co-founder. And then from there, he said, I want to get into alternative energy. So he worked there a bit, then pivoted to work in wearable devices. So was early on the team at Oura Ring, has gotten involved with many, many other startups, was an early tester for the Whoop wearable, and today works at Heads Up Health, advises Cardio Mood, which I'm wearing right now. Today's conversation is a really deep dive into both the history of health, the why of health, or why people are so unhealthy in this country, but even more interestingly, the future of health. So we're talking smart homes, connected toilets, implants, measuring your glucose all the time. We're talking about anything you can imagine that's at the cutting edge of what it means to be healthy, to perform, and to feel better. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Chuck Hazzard. All right, Chuck Hazzard, welcome to Green Pill. First question, will you take the green pill?
Absolutely.
All right, that's the spirit. So what are you seeing out there today in the world of wearables, trackers, sensors, and the opposite of the world that's not so healthy and not so forward-looking?
Yeah, it's an interesting time that we're in right now. The wearables, the metrics that they're tracking are getting more accurate each passing year. For instance, the Apple Watch, since the Apple Watch 4, had a very accurate heart rate tracking of the wrist. Nobody got even close. And over the last couple of years, Garmin especially has been nibbling, and they finally, in this year with their 5th generation optical heart rate sensor, are matching Apple. Right? So we're seeing extremely accurate heart rate, and I think the same is happening with heart rate variability, which a lot of longevity doctors are looking at.
What is heart rate variability for folks?
So when your heart rate doesn't beat like a metronome, it actually varies between each beats. And the more it varies, this metric called rate variability, the higher that is. It's not 0 to 100, it goes higher than that. And so if you look at the trending of that over time, most people as they age, pretty much everybody as they age, their heart rate variability, if you track it when they're young, they go down, just like VO2 max, which is an estimation of how much oxygen you can take up into your body through exercise. But that's harder to change, but TRB can actually go down pretty quickly. And really the only way to keep that high is exercise, like not lifting necessarily. Unfortunately, that's good for you too, but it has to be like aerobic exercise, being stair climber. I should mention that HRV is one of the ways that a lot of wearables are giving the users an estimate of their stress during the day. Garmin does that. Whoop is doing that. Seeing more companies like some of the Fitbits, certainly Cardio Mood, are using what's called EDA sensors, electrodermal. It's more like a lie detector. So it's measuring sweat on your body. And from that, it's a little bit better estimation of stress. And the other thing too is, if you can measure stress, is there a real-time or near-time feedback loop into some protocol, which Garmin does? They actually notify you that on the watch and ask you if you want to do a breathing protocol, which ways to your stress.
Um,
Garmin doesn't have EDA. They actually use HRV to estimate stress. That's what most of the ones that like Whoop and stuff.
mhm.
And it works pretty well, but you can have a lot of false positives because you could have gone out and like I do for a run,
Mhm.
and even 2-3 hours later, I'm 63 now. My heart rate and might be high, and my HRV might be low, like I'm in a stress state,
Mhm.
based as opposed to my baseline that Guy's been
Mhm.
tracking for over a year. That's one of the good things and the changes of things that are happening in the wearable industry is there's much more focus on the mental side
Okay.
of health. So stress track and putting in like, even though Aura doesn't track stress, they still have a big focus on breathing protocols, meditation, yoga, things like that.
And I guess setting the table for folks out there, you've got your Apple Watch, your Aura, your Garmin devices that folks might know about. They've heard of Whoop. And today we'll touch
Or
on some of. And so there's wearables for tracking your heart rate, your HRV, your sleep, what we call recovery or autonomic arousal, your stress in some different ways. Of course, your exercise, which people think about the pedometer and the Fitbit as some of the earlier trackers. And so the wearable penetration as a percentage of the population is, I heard it's 20 to 25%. Is that fair to say from your ballpark
yeah, and
estimate?
unfortunately, lots of surveys have determined that of the people who have adopted wearables, they're the people that really don't need them as much because
Mm-hmm.
they're already healthy.
Yep.
Certainly people at companies like Garmin, the people that are buying Garmin's are people that are endurance athletes
Yep.
or avid hikers doing the AT, the Appalachian Trail. It's not the person who's suffering from chronic kidney disease, autoimmune disease, type 2 diabetes, heart disease of many flavors,
Mm-hmm.
cancer, you name it, or depression. So
Mm-hmm.
those are the buying wearables, and those are probably the people that would benefit the most from an appropriate wearable for their use condition.
And I think today we'll talk about, as mentioned, equity when it comes to health and some of the cool things that are happening as wearable device companies go B2B and go more into the health sector. You talk about Livongo and some other remote monitoring platforms for diabetes prevention, reversal, and amelioration. So that 20 to 25% ballpark are affluent people generally because the price point is high. And the desire to optimize comes from someone who's already
Yeah, but
okay.
that said, Fitbit's and Garmin both have solutions at close to $100.
Yep.
And not everybody has health insurance that is through the sort of the public health insurance doesn't have any incentives I know of. Some of the private insurers, like in companies like that or United, for their members do have incentives where they'll say, hey, you can get Apple Watch for 50%.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And so what do you think a future with remote patient monitoring, with wearable devices, with at-home testing of blood, urine, stool, environmental air quality, light, what's a connected future look like for health if the US were to come from 26th or 25th out of all OECD countries, Organization of Economically Developed Countries, to first? How would we get there? We got to talk about healthcare expense, but what is this connected future that really could be on the table for us if we got there?
I think as a country, we need to make sure our healthcare system focuses more on preventative health, right? So that's the first starting point. Because if you look at everything, and this is a controversial topic, but the recent pandemic we went through,
Hmm.
there's no question the US had spent the last 3 decades focusing on preventative health care. We were likely would have had less people dying from COVID because if people are truly healthy and have a zipped up immune system, they can fight COVID was bad, but it's like a flu. If you're super healthy, you're probably not going to get the you might still get it, but the chances are less likely because you have a much healthier immune system.
Hmm.
So we have not focused on preventative health, and we now have, I think, more than 50% of the population is clinically considered obese, which is not a good place to be in. So that is the first step, is getting the population healthy. So whatever that takes, recognizing that not everybody, and this is the thing where not everybody can afford a wearable diet device or even a weight scale to track these things, or not have to pay for a health coach to
Hmm.
help them on this journey, because not everybody can do this alone. They're not as motivated. Everybody's not as motivated as the next person. So I think, that's what we need to think about, is how can we create delivery system which has the devices, the coaches, and the platforms where these people can be monitored and encouraged through the coaching, behavioral change, all that stuff, and start turning the tide on, instead of being over 50% of the people being in a really bad shape from a healthcare standpoint, to people that are healthy, that feel good every morning. That is their new norm, not the norm that they feel like crap when they wake up every day and they have trouble moving around.
And looking at CDC data, I think diabetes prevalence is 35% or more among the general
Right.
population. That data is as of 2020. I think in 2020, obesity prevalence was 42%, and now it's probably gone up to 50%.
Yeah. And there are the lingos and other startups in that space for type 2 diabetes reversal. They cost money, and they've been fighting the battle to get private
Insurance.
insurers to start paying for that. And they're starting to get headway with that, because over the long haul, it saves these insurance companies a ton of money. Because it's not only having to pay for insulin and
Hmm.
the glucose strips to check your glucose, or Dexcom or Abbott's Libre, but usually these people also have increased chances of heart disease.
And so there's an incentive question here when you get those really morbid, nasty outcomes, but those aren't edge cases. We all know someone with
Right.
diabetes, and we all know someone with advanced diabetes. And
By the way, if you're on insulin, a lot of the people as smarter than I am in that space have talked about that we should be monitoring insulin instead, as opposed to glucose with diabetics. Because if you give a diabetic too much glucose, they can still become, you could basically I think it's type 1 diabetics can become insulin resistant.
resistant. And type
Yeah.
2 can be too, I think.
So the problem is, people will happily, if they have an insulin pump connected to their iPhone, they can have chocolate cake and just pump a bunch of insulin to their body and keep their glucose low, which is not the thing they should be doing.
And if we look at we can get into the mechanisms of how glucose is regulated in the body. But I guess what we're seeing as a landscape now is the U.S. is really unhealthy across so many metabolic, cardiovascular metrics, and not just on paper, but people don't feel well, and that we all have a family
Right.
member or friend who's in that shape. And so I was so excited to bring you on because your background and experience and passion for connected health, remote devices, wearables, tracking, etc., allow people like you and I to envision this future where people don't get to that point, right? So we're talking about prevention. And then if they are off track, they can be caught easier and put back on track easier. And it does seem a bit top down, surveillance, big brother. And
Right.
you and I have talked about that, and we can get to that later in the podcast. But another angle are the elderly, right? And the elderly, quite lonely. We don't want to say there's an epidemic of loneliness, but they can fall, right? They can
Mhm.
have blood markers that change much more severely. And so these wearable devices like the Apple Watch has a gait tracker that people don't realize. It tracks how
In the
much you
back.
wobble. Could you tell us a bit about what you think about for elderly folks and what you've seen? I think the Apple
Well,
Watch is a good place to start.
yeah, the Apple Watch is interesting, although I don't think that's necessarily the right device for an elder person.
Sure.
A lot of now the baby boomers, there's a big surge in people entering this part of their life. I'm on the tail end of that, so I'm a little more technically savvy than
Hmm.
some of my peers. But yes, the Apple Watch, through the motion sensor, is actually in the background. Unless you dig into Apple Health, the app on the iPhone, you would never know the stuff's in there. But yeah, it looks at how much force you exert as you're walking. Is it symmetric or not? What's your walking speed? And from your walking speed, they can actually provide guidance to a healthcare provider of your aging process, for instance. I think for the elders at home, aging at home should be where we focus on, instead of sticking people in nursing homes.
Hmm.
No question they're happier at home. They can find the right care to make sure they don't hurt themselves. That's where they want to be. And I think for aging at home, the environment has to be very passive and frictionless.
Frictionless.
There are plenty of very good bed systems now. For instance, the Withing seat mat, very simple, plug it in. They've got a model that can actually upload through a cell backhaul and go directly into the Epic system that most of the big hospitals use for software. So if their doctor prescribes a seat mat to their older senior patient, they can now monitor the sleep of the seat mat in their patient record. Shows up there
Hmm.
for the Withings.
So cool.
Yeah, and they have the same thing. They have a scale that does the same thing. So grandma steps on the scale every day after she goes to the bathroom. You get the weight every day, plus their heart rate, blood pressure cuff, blood pressure, press, heart rate, cell backhaul to also, you can get that. So if
No
they've got
Wi-Fi required. Yeah.
and again, if they may not have Wi-Fi, right, and they don't
Right.
have a cell phone, forget a lot of these wearables require a mobile device. And
Mhm.
I've said for years, that's great for some people, but you need to lose the mobile. You need to have an option where no mobile device is
Mhm.
required.
Reduce
And
friction.
so again, a doctor on an Epic system in a hospital in the patient record can get daily readings, because if they're aging at home, they probably have somebody that stops by at least every day, a family
Mhm.
member
Mhm.
or something that can ask them, did you weigh yourself? Or they can see it on the web. They can share the web interface Withings with caregivers so they can see if they weigh themselves, but they can help them with the blood pressure cuff, make sure it's on properly, check their blood pressure, for instance. So you can get quite a few vitals from somebody at your home. Should also mention it's got a temperature sensor, which again be sent.
Hmm.
Oh, they've had this for a few years. It's called Thermo
Hmm.
or something like that.
He's showing it on the screen here for folks that don't see it, but it's a cylindrical tube that, how does that work?
Yeah. We just, it's on the thing. So you just
It's like a thermometer. He's putting it up to his
click
forehead.
it, 98 degrees, and you just scroll down. You can have multiple people and you select yourself and boom, it's uploaded to the cloud and can show up on platforms that integrate with things. Yeah, they've also, it's not out yet now, but they have a thing they announced it, the Computer Electronics Show this past year, that hangs on your toilet and it actually reads metabolites off your urine stream. So it can also get more data points for what someone their health is. Again, for aging at home, you can do a lot for monitoring a person with just the Withings product family.
Just
As an
Withings.
example.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
Withings. And if you add some of the gait tracking, if you add some of the light tracking, the digital therapeutics, which we'll touch on. So I think there is a future that could get here. It's a matter of incentives. And it sounds like the insurance companies are coming around on incentives because they're spending so much on long-term care.
Yeah. So so that's what I should point out is the US government puts out periodically new codes. They call CPT codes.
Hmm.
And during the pandemic, they released a bunch that were temporarily, but they seem to be here forever.
Hmm.
And those new codes were directly in support to remote patient monitoring, which is a good
Yep.
thing. So even if it's not a big hospital, not normally do this way, even if they have a primary doctor who's willing to invest a little bit of time to get it set up,
Mhm.
is you can get reimbursed one time for the setting up of for each device in the house. So if it's grandma in the house, you
Mhm.
get, I think it's $90. So $90 for the scale, the blood pressure cuff, the sleep mat,
Mhm.
and the thing in the toilet. Thermometer, 5
Each.
devices. So
Each, right?
a couple hundred, yeah, a couple $100. So call it a couple $100. And then every month that they're in compliance for the metrics that you can actually track over to the RPM codes would be things like pulse ox, weight, glucose readings. There might be a few, and maybe the sleep also.
Sleep, yeah. Mhm.
Because of what's going on with them, the sleep mat doesn't actually diagnose sleep apnea on Withings, but it will give you enough information about sleep disturbances. They'll tell you to go through sleep study. Even if grandma doesn't have sleep apnea, you'll be able to see if they have sleep disturbances. So you could probably get sleep on the RPM also. So each one of these metrics you track, these vitals, you can get reimbursed each month, and then you get reimbursed for each 20-minute block you're talking to like a consult. Maybe the
Mhm.
family member's there, you has an iPad and you get them on a Zoom call and the doctor does a consult. So
And so the model is shifting based on those CPT codes you mentioned, and I think they've become permanent. And I should say that health coaching is also on level 3 experimental of
yeah,
by Medicaid, biggest payer in the US. So I have 0591T, 2T, and
yeah.
592 and 593 as
Yeah,
health coaching codes.
those came out during COVID also, and they're not reimbursable yet, are they? Or are
No,
they?
but they're just being tracked, just like
Yeah,
acupuncture and chiro
yeah,
were being tracked. And you
yeah.
told me that. And so that's something where I'm probably just filling in your sentence, but the model is shifting from the payer, who's an insurance company, to RPM, remote patient monitoring, and coaching. What else needs to shift, whether it be for elderly or otherwise? Mindset is a tough one, right? But
Yeah, no,
incentives lead.
I
Yeah.
guess the problem is because insurance became so hard to work with.
Hmm.
A lot of the doctors that weren't in the hospital systems, they
Hmm.
left the payer system. So they
Hmm.
went to cash pay.
Private. Hmm.
So that took out a lot of people because
Hmm.
unless you got thousands of dollars to throw in
Hmm.
your bank account to throw at your health condition, you just
Hmm.
can't. So
Hmm.
you're ending up going to the hospital. And the hospital systems are god awful expensive.
Hmm.
You can get payment plans with a lot of the bigger hospitals and stuff like that, but still it's expensive. And there is a big rise in medical bankruptcies for that reason.
Hmm.
So we've got to figure out the cost structure in hospitals. Hospitals, maybe that long term should be thought of the place people go for the very short term, acute, the shit is hit the fan. You got in a car
Hmm.
accident, or you've had a heart attack, or you're truly on the last stages of life, suffering from some stage 4 cancer
Hmm.
and likely to die in a week. And you just
Hmm.
need constant
Triage.
more
Yeah.
drips or whatever, that kind of thing. Everything else should be outside of the hospital.
Because it's so expensive. And,
Yeah,
and
because there's a lot of things. Why spend? I mean, it's probably $2,000 at my local hospital for an EKG. Why is that when you could work with, I think they have 12 lead from Cardia now, but I could probably get that system. They could send it to my house
12 leads, like
and
12
maybe with
pieces that the electrodes they can attach to
yeah,
you.
the Cardia is, this is a 6 lead.
Mm.
They've got a 12 lead now. It's about the same thing.
He's holding
But
up
I'm
a
telling you,
small
if they have
cylinder
the
that's like the size of 2
yeah,
inches. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
but anyway, if the one they kind of thing they use in the hospital, they could have trained assistants that go out in the field. They show up at your house, just like doing blood draws. Why
Hmm.
go to the hospital for that? Pay money for that.
Hmm.
You get it cheaper and send it out to a lab yourself. So we need to figure out a cost structure that is going to work to make healthcare cost effective and competitive with other countries because we're not there where there's a big differential. And the only way to do that is these hospitals have got way too much real estate. They can turn that into affordable housing.
Hmm.
Seriously, it, just slim down the number of beds they have way back, take it way back, move some of this stuff out into the urban communities, small ones that only have like 25 beds. That's all they need, a surgery suite, whatever it is, but make them just micro satellite hospitals. Get rid of the big monolith things in all the cities now and make them much smaller. And then have most of the stuff done at home because there's no reason for that. A lot of stuff you can do at home or through a Zoom call. Because right now you go to a big hospital, it's on Epic, guarantee the doctor's not going to look in the eyes. They're going to
No,
be
because they're
typing in Epic.
typing, and we all have the experience where doctors, and they're doing their best
Yeah,
because they have a patient overload, had
right.
a PCP
Yeah,
in
I'm not
Miami.
blaming
And
them, but
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and they're all sent to get MBAs because now it's big business. It's a profit and loss.
And it's been that way for some time, although I was reading Atul Gawande's book, and Gawande is a public health intellectual doctor from Stanford who writes quite a bit on the nature of health in the country, all kinds of subjects, but he wrote Being Mortal about aging, and it was in nursing homes and how
Right.
they developed and why. And he actually mentions that hospitals only became so big and started fulfilling these other functions after World War II. So prior to World War II, hospitals were simply for triage, for critical cases. And what
Yeah.
happened was that the elderly, they were no longer poorhouses. They were no longer really socially viable. So there was a social security system in the 30s that got built by FDR. And So the elderly,
Mhm.
when they would have a serious issue, would go to the hospital and they would stay there. And so the hospital said, we can't have our beds being occupied by these people who are not going to get much better and just need long-term care. So they started building nursing homes. And that's why, just for a small aside, that nursing homes became so institutionalized and focused on safety and prevention. And so like now hospitals, as you mentioned, are so big and it seems like they're treating everything because they're a big behemoth. And I think you and I have talked about how hospitals are absorbing smaller practices too, where doctors
Mhm.
are no
Yep.
longer, practicing on their own, but it's more financially savvy for them to be under hospital systems, billing and customer service and all that. But then they just become a glorified, hourly worker in that model. And a lot of doctors don't like that
Right.
too. Seems
And
like
it's like
incentives
the
drive a lot of
pharmaceutical.
this. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is, and even in the pharmaceutical industry, which is another player in our healthcare system,
Sure.
right, is they bigger is not always better, but they can't maintain profitability unless they keep merging with each other.
Mhm.
And so at the end of the day, we may end up in a decade with 3 hospitals systems in the US, and they're going to be huge and they're going to be expensive, but they'll shift the cost around. And some people will, yeah, get both their knees replaced and not pay a penny because they're 70 years old and it's way more than Medicaid will cover, but they still let it go. And then somebody shows up with insurance and they stick you with a $5,000 cardiac work. And
It's
that's not right either.
I think people know it's not right. You go to Europe, like you said, your friend you were
They don't.
talking.
Every time I have to go to the hospital for something, I just get floored when I get the bill. I've got insurance too, but it's basically $15,000 a year out of pocket.
Deductible, right? And insurance
Yeah.
quality is getting worse. Private
Yeah.
insurance, that is, since Obamacare. And I'm glad Obamacare reduced the uninsured population quite a bit by maybe 10%. But it seems that insurance is driven by work mostly, decent insurance anyway.
Yeah. And,
So,
and with most people, it used to be the employer, you covered 100%, then it got to be
mhm,
80%. And now it's to a point where they give you the menu and they'll pay a little bit, like half of the employee,
mhm,
but you still have to play the game is how much can you afford taking out of your paycheck to make
mhm,
ends meet?
mhm,
So you may end up with a higher deductible than
mhm.
normally would because you can't afford to have the bigger chunk taken out of your check every week. And you're hedging the bet that you're not going to get sick. That doesn't always work.
And it's a tough system that it's not always a positive conversation. We talk about health in this country, to be honest. Where I get
Yeah.
excited is we talk about some of the cool wearables coming down the pipe, and maybe you tie that together with some reimbursement. Are you seeing anything
Yeah.
cool get
The only thing
reimbursed? Yeah.
that's the thing is the CPT codes they don't say you have to have FDA approval for the metrics. So in theory, with the right biller to see if it floats, you could get a Garmin watch or an Apple Watch. Apple's might be FDA, but say a Garmin that's not or an Oura Ring that's not, and use that to track pulse ox on a patient and get it reimbursed. I'm not sure anybody's checked that I've known of. So there has been talk of another bunch of codes are for digital therapeutics. And some of the thoughts have been, could you combine a digital therapeutic with a wearable and get the wearable reimbursed that way? And what digital therapeutics are way to influence the human body without using a drug per se, but achieving similar outcomes.
Mm.
And some examples of that is there are startup companies like this one I know of, and I can't think of the name right now,
Is it
but
Rockley? No.
s- they use sound it's not going to cure something like Parkinson's or
Mhm,
dementia, but can actually increase the quality of life at that point in time for the patient. So they
mhm,
can do that through music. They've also shown through electrostimulation, they can totally eliminate tremors of a Parkinson patient. So that's not using a drug. It's using what's called a digital therapeutic. So it's a e-stem, they call it. Other things like this thing I have on is a HAP-B,
FB.
HAPBE. they've got a daytime device, which is this. You can increase your energy, the equivalent of drinking coffee for most people without drinking coffee, because they use electromagnetic stimulation, low powered, and it triggers the same pathways in your brain, stimulates the same pathways in your brain, like if you had coffee. And so you can change the frequencies, tune the frequencies different off the device, increase energy like coffee, bring yourself down for more effective meditation. They've got a thing that goes in your pillowcase for sleep, same technology, same frequencies, different recipes. And they've got some to give you the most incredible sleep you can get based on the time you can dedicate to sleep. So as opposed to just sleeping, because again, they can bring you down to the frequency, it's brain entrainment, and get you in a place where you're going to hit the nice long deep sleeps in the beginning, the REM sleep later on in sleep, your sleep cycles. And there are other ones, Apollo Neuro, I think you've used and I've used, that uses a vibration on your skin, same kind of thing. You can tune it to achieve different things like increasing energy, increasing sleep drive, those sorts of things. And then there are sound companies. There's one called out of Europe in the Nordic countries called Melocura, and they've got a bunch of frequencies kind of thing. Yeah, it's MELOKURO. They're just releasing their app. But yeah, it's the same thing, brain entrainment, and you can do energy, sleep, just general mood, reverse depression, like bringing out of depression. So there are lots and lots of examples, and there are now codes for reimbursement for these sorts of things.
I think people listening are like, what? I can cure my depression with sound or with electric stimulation?
Yeah. Yeah. There have been studies that have shown people have been able to increase the quality of their life, people that suffer from chronic depression, by using some of this technology.
Yeah. And I'll link all these companies so folks can look into it. Another one that I think you mentioned to me was the digital therapeutics based on music for, I think maybe that was what you mentioned with Parkinson's, where folks are listening to a certain rhythm and music has some impact on the brain that isn't maybe not well understood, but seems to measurably reduce folks' symptoms. Is that right? Is that the one you were mentioning?
That's correct. That is correct. Yeah.
And you talk about breath work, meditation, some of these protocols, non-sleep deep rest, yoga nidra, in other words, or really deep breathing and slowing down of the heart rate.
Yeah. And let's see, if you look at, even without the new tech we've come out with over the years, go back to Ayurvedic medicine or what the Chinese have been doing or Tibet with meditation. But even Ayurvedic medicine, if you're stressed, tapping your head actually relaxes you. And a lot of people don't know that.
Didn't know that.
And that's sort of like Apollo Neuro. It works.
So it's a consistent feedback of some kind that tricks the brain.
And you can actually read. There are other things in the point, the chakras, that you can do things with electric stimulation on the chakras, and they've done studies on this, or simply heat or cold or tapping on those spots. And you can actually elicit different responses in the human body. So it's fascinating stuff.
And there's another one. It sounds woo, but there's data to back it up. It seems, and I've looked through some of these companies and they're serious and they cite the studies. It's not really woo-woo. It's not woo. Can you talk about HeartMath? That was another one that I remember, and tell people what that is and how it works.
Yeah. So I got exposed to HeartMath over a decade ago at a conference, and they were pretty new on the scene. But what HeartMath does, it's really a biofeedback device. And what they're trying to achieve is have you just focus on, it could be visual patterns or just memories, and get yourself in what's called coherence, which is, there are two sides of your autonomic nervous system. There's the fight or flight, which is we don't want to be in too much, and we are too much stress, or relaxation. And coherence is just a little bit towards the stress side of the middle. But it's another way to think of it is, and I think these things are very similar, is people talk about in the last decade about flow states, where you get in that groove. Like if people have ever been scary enough at driving down a road and you've gone a mile or two and you can't remember that section of the road,
Mm-hmm.
but you were so like uber focused,
Mm-hmm.
you got in a flow state. So subconsciously you were driving the car, but your conscious was not there. And so it's the same kind of thing. If you can get in coherence and stay in coherence, you can do really great things. One, you'll not be stressed, but if it's a way, I've always told people, because I was a HeartMath coach, it's like training wheels. So using HeartMath to train yourself, if you feel like getting stressed, what brings you out of this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think about the TV show Scrubs, if you ever saw
Mm-hmm.
that. There was
Of
one guy
course.
that whenever his wife, they had a tense relationship, but whenever she was talking to him, he would go to the beach in his mind.
Oh, that's
The
yeah.
casinos and
Yeah.
stuff, Anyway, but to get out of that stressful situation and get in coherence, you're then in the perfect place to make things happen.
How does that
And
work with measuring your heart rate and doing biofeedback, like
yeah,
a
so
feedback loop from a device?
originally, I tell you about one of the studies. So the original device, and I got one here somewhere, and I don't know where it is right now, but it was called an EM wave. And that one, you could plug a wire into it and flip it to your earlobe, or one
Okay.
earlobe, or you could put your finger on a sensor, and basically it was gamified. It didn't have a screen output, but it would basically give you very subtle tones of vibrations. So it would tell you based on that, if you were getting closer to coherence and when you were truly in coherence and
Mm-hmm.
stayed in coherence. And HeartMath has done more research on heart rate variability, which we talked about earlier, than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they're measuring HRV to determine that coherence zone and whether you're in it.
Live. Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what they've been doing for a couple decades now. So they've done a ton of studies. So like they did a nurse with a bunch of nurses. It was probably like 50 nurses, but they could keep the EM wave in their pocket. No wire, just the finger thing. And if they felt they were getting stress, they could subtly put their finger on it, and start the process of going through the protocols that they had developed with their coach to get out of stress and get in coherence. And they found they used surveys that over time, the stress of these nurses diminished immensely.
Really? How long is the
Because they
protocol?
built up resilience.
Act
That's why
differently.
it's like
Yeah.
training wheels. So once you get trained in it, when the signal hits that you're getting stressed, you're feeling anxiety's coming on,
Mm-hmm.
you could start the protocol. You've got the training wheels, and you know what it feels like to be in coherence.
Mm-hmm. To come back to it.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Exactly. And so they came out with a phone app where you could visualize. They can have things where like a breathing pacer kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Visualization, the visualization things you can look at, or you can, if you're just a nerd and you want to look at it, you can see the pulse waveform from your actual high resolution heart rate going through time, which is like your HRV. And then you can see the thing going up as you go into coherence. And if you come down, you start having negative thoughts, you can bring it back down.
Unreal.
So you can see how easy it is to control your coherence.
There's HRV for
and this
biofeedback too. You may touch on Marco Altini's program. So
yeah, he's got that. And Alleviate HRV, I think, had a way to do that.
So that's where you measure your HRV live and do stuff and see it change, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to learn about flow state, Stephen Kotler wrote the book, The Rise of Superman, and just thinking about how the athletes are achieving things people thought would never happen.
Really?
Surfing bigger waves and all that stuff. And he talks to these athletes, they were able to get into a flow state.
So it's really pushing the limits of human performance.
Yeah. So getting into, basically it's getting in coherence. That's where everything's clicking.
How often can one do that in a given day? Huberman talks about two flow states.
You can you can get into flow state whenever you want. Like you could, and this is what Stephen Kotler's group, and they've been working on this flow state stuff for
what are they called? Flow research or something?
I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some sort of research, but I can't remember what it is. But like, for instance, software developers is getting a whole group of software developers, programmers, to get into flow states, training them how to do that. And they could come up with elaborate solutions to problems they weren't able to solve in short amounts of time. Think about wolves in nature, hunting, right? They're more efficient as a pack than they are as individuals because they work as a group. So again, it's like group flow state.
Damn. You're an ultra runner. People don't know, but you've run, you could tell people, definitely over 50-mile races repeatedly, right? 50 km.
Yeah.
And
Less
you
these
get
years, but
less these years, but people would not believe your age. I did not
yeah.
believe you were 63 or 62 or 61 whenever we met. I didn't believe it. No, now you are. And did you got in a flow state while running crazy up the hill, down the hill? Because you have to, right? At a certain point, the pain wall hits and you have to just accept it and your mind takes over. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I got to be a very good technical downhill runner. And my poor wife looks at me and, my legs are just going a million miles an hour through rock, going really fast. Like the road runner, she's like, how do you do that? I said, I don't even think about it. I just go. And it's like your subconscious, whether it's like a big video game or whatever. But yeah, I just get into it, the zone, and just go for it. And don't sprain my ankle. I don't trip and fall on my face or,
What is that thing you said about when we met a few weeks back about how your brain actually sees what's coming before you consciously realize it or makes a decision?
Right. Well,
What is that?
Convinced the subconscious is looking out to protect you from hurting yourself. There's no way that your subconscious wants you hurt and injured. So I believe that when I'm running, I think like for someone like my wife, she overthinks it, and that's when you get. But if you just go with it, I think the subconscious is mapping out where your foot's going to hit each time. So you're not going to twist the ankle, you're not going to trip. I have to say you won't wipe out occasionally because you lose it. And it can become stressful if you're running a very long, a couple mile downhill that's extremely technical. You get that second mile, it starts to get a little stressful, and that's when you're to make a mistake, and you might have to slow down. Yeah,
like
but that's
basketball
what flow
too.
states come in. That's where I think these big wave surfers, looking at gymnastics and the Olympics, the routines that some of these women are doing now, or the men, unbelievable.
And a lot of it
You
comes from
just
the
can't.
mind, not to be too woo-woo, but yeah. Go ahead.
That's what they're doing. They're able to get into a flow state.
And I guess like nowadays you have cyclists using Whoop as a start, but they're also using heat sensors, which you've told me about. So it's a small sensor somewhere on their body that senses their core body temp and can give a sense of how and why they should train, both in the race and before the race. You have lactate sensors, you mentioned ketone sensors, of course, glucose sensors.
Yeah.
We talked about smart toilets.
I think thinking about people that are at the top of their game, like this week into the weekend is Ultra Trail Mont Blanc in Chamonix, France, top ultra runners in the world. And seeing the interviews with them, again, some of them are taught, like Tom Evans from the UK, talked about he uses the core body temperature sensor. A lot of them use saunas for recovery or cold immersion. There's one gal who's, whenever she gets injured, she uses hyperbaric chambers because it actually hyperbaric chambers that you're getting like a lot of oxygen, more than you normally would have in your body in a short amount of time. And that speeds up wound healing, bone healing, and everything. And magnets speed up bone healing and tendon muscle soreness.
And how does a layperson keep track of all this? Because you hear cold plunging getting really cool now. There was saunas before that. The fasting was big. You see these trends inevitable in the health space, and you've been in it a while.
But for the average person, I would not do any of that stuff. So seriously, I would just clean up your eating. Really, it starts with the diet. Nail your sleep and move during the day, and everything will click. I don't care what disease you have. If you can clean your diet, I mean, get rid of all the crap, processed food. And I don't care. You don't have to be keto. You don't have to be, you can be a vegetarian or keto, but you don't have to be. Everybody talks about the Mediterranean diet. That probably is the best, well-rounded one if you tolerate fish. But if you don't, chicken and take fish oil.
Omega subs.
Put that in. Just nail the sleep, nail the stress, and move more. Get natural sunlight during the day, especially morning and end of the day. Go for a walk. Walk briskly if you're going to walk in. If you don't exercise beyond walking briskly, you'll go a long way to optimize your health.
And so there's this pyramid where sleep, food, fitness, stress, light exposure are the top 5.
Yeah, and people don't even need a wearable crap. If you just keep a logbook, but try and go to bed and wake up at the same time every day and wake up the same time every morning, 7 days a week. Don't do social jet lag. Stay out till the cows come home on nights. Because do that. Mondays really suck, and
Yeah.
sometimes Tuesdays. But you'll feel better if you go to bed, wake up, morning light, nighttime night, move during the day, eat better. Don't eat within 2 to 3 hours before bed. If you like drinking wine, try and keep it to 1, 2 hours before bed.
These simple heuristics are almost go back to Ayurvedic principles,
I mean, that's
stuff
just
our
normal life.
grandparents did. And I think one piece of context, I'd love to hear your view on it with your grandparents' generation. I think you said your grandpa had a farm or something. He smoked and he still lived till he was 90.
He 106, but he had good genetics.
He had good genetics.
He was a super centurion, but he had good genetics. He drank too much wine, but he had a hard work ethic. He was a farmer, so he went to bed when the sun went down, even in the summer up here in the Northeast,
Mhm.
pretty early, and got up when it came up and to milk the cows and all that stuff. Ate the fields and
Shovel his own driveway.
but they
Moved a
ate
lot.
a meat, potato, and vegetable diet. They would pickle vegetables and eat those in the winter, and had potatoes all winter, and they had meat all year long, and ate salads in the summer. They were local boar and seasonal and all the things we talk about now.
I know it's hard to square for me, these really advanced interventions and modalities, some of which we've discussed, and then the common sense, all the earth advice where live by the sun, eat a lot more natural, don't eat processed food and move a lot. Both are true, and yet the former seems much more sexy for people. They want the quick
Oh, yeah,
fix.
but
People
I'll
want
tell
to
you,
get out
just
of
like
it.
this, in recent years, there have been several groups that have gone out to actually study the blue zones, the people that
Mhm.
have more centurions than any place on the earth.
Mhm.
And what they come back with, the only thing that meant a difference was community. Dan, was
Mm,
community.
that's one piece we
These
missed.
people, they lived in tight communities. They had a good network of friends.
Mhm.
Didn't matter what they ate. They ate bread, gluten,
Mhm.
too much saturated fats.
Hmm.
Some of them smoked, drink too much.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. It was community.
No way. Huh.
And none of them they don't have Fitbits and Whoop straps and
No.
Oura rings or any of that stuff, or cooled beds, or they're outside in fresh air as much as they can. They go for walks, hike in the mountains in some cases. And yeah.
It makes me pivot almost to this idea of device addiction that you and I have talked about a lot, because
Yeah.
we have this desire to add all these, you're the wearables guy, I'm a wearable guy, I'm wearing it, my cardio mood now. I grew up with a computer. You certainly grew up as immersed in the early days of the computer age and had some impact on it. How do we turn that around? I'm almost asking personally, because I was visiting the Hadza in Tanzania, and
Yeah.
saying that they don't sleep, they don't have a house, they sleep under
Yeah.
the sun. Sorry,
Well,
but yeah, how do we turn that
yeah.
around? Yeah.
And that's not many people talk about that. You see some people on LinkedIn talk about it, but I used to see this when I was at conferences like Paleo Effects and
Mhm.
Data Conference, when I was working for Oura Ring. But wearable devices can cause people huge amount of anxiety, or apps. So it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be like the device. So for instance, have people ask me, this is just an aside. I met with a
Sure.
guy yesterday, a PhD graduate from Dartmouth
Uh-huh.
College. And he said, he had a Garmin Phoenix 6X on. He wore it, Leadville 100. Didn't even train for it, but he finished it just under the cutoff. Amazing. But anyway, he asked me, he said, I had a Garmin 400 965, Oura Ring, a Whoop 40, a Cardio Mood, Libre 3, all this stuff. And he said, what do you do with the data, all that data? And I said, I don't look at it, quite honestly. I really don't. I might glance at it. But the problem is, a lot of people, they get advice, they take it as gospel, and
Mm.
it stresses out of them. What if a device tracks stress and you're in stress mode all the time, like a Whoop Pro? You're like, oh my God, I'm broken. What do I do? And so they get frantically. They're posting on Facebook groups,
Forums. Yeah.
whatever, Reddit. So that's a problem. Or you got people there, the data doesn't bother them. They don't even look at the sleep data from their Coros or their Garmin or whatever, but they're on Strava. And then they're competing with all their friends, and that causes them stress because their friends ran 12 miles, they only ran 8, and they become just overtakes their life. So they just can't get past it, and they're unhappy.
Is it the simple question, is a chicken or egg, but more complicated question with digital With digital devices permeating our entire society from phones, computers, you grew up in a time without
Yeah.
digital, right? It was TV, radio, some computer.
Yeah.
I grew up in a
We
time
ran around in the
we
woods.
ran and played
Yeah.
outside, but I also had a computer since I was 7. And frankly, I do feel
Yeah.
pretty compulsive towards it. But these blue zone folks, to generalize, they're not necessarily always on devices, at least if you look back the last
No.
100 years. And I was in Africa recently and everyone had a mobile phone, no computers generally.
Yeah. Yeah. They're mobile only, and that's
Mobile only. But they're addicted to it too.
Oh.
Like, how do we decrease that? Do we use stuff like OneSec, Freedom.to, screen tracking time? I know you and I talked about that recently.
Yeah.
How do we get off the device in computer land as a mental health thing, as a health thing overall?
There's no easy answer to that because it really starts in the household, right? All my friends that have kids, their kids seem to have a cell phone, access to something, or an iPad. We had personal computers when I had my kids when they were young, and I restricted their time. I had built my own firewall off a Linux box so I could monitor what was going on, and filter stuff, and I was shutting their access down
Wow.
at certain times of the day. And when cell phones came up, they weren't allowed to have a cell phone. It
Wow.
was free and clear.
Just weren't allowed. Yeah. And would you
Until
do
they
that
were-
today?
until they were
Would you do that today?
I would try. I would
You would-
try. I think
yeah.
the pressure would be harder now because it would be kids would have the fear of missing out because all their friends have iPhones and whatever. So I think that would be the challenge. It'd be much tougher with the computer access because they use them in schools now, and the expectation is kids have access at home. That's been going on for a couple decades now. But yeah, that is the true downside. I think wearables should be a tool to understand what's going on, but it's not the end game. At the end of the day, your body, listen to your body. That is because for instance, I was just telling this guy yesterday again, they'd be doing Sunto would come out with the first company, I believe, that had a recovery timer after each workout. It would tell you how many hours you needed to recover. And so I'd gotten one given to me by a distributor. It's called the original Ambit. It did that. So my wife and I, the first year we did the Trans Rockies run, a 6-day stage race in the Colorado Rockies. After the first day, it said you need 37 hours to recover. I had 5 more days of this. So I woke up the next morning, I felt great. And it said I still had 20 something hours to recover. And we did really well the second stage. And it was up to 40 something or 50 something after that day. And woke up the next morning, felt great. We did well that stage. Right through the 6th stage, we did fine. And
So it's
Garmin,
not-
even this
it's
last
not-
week is on. Yeah, so you got to listen to your body. So it doesn't matter. And so again, it's a way to get a better example of if you don't want to log, like when you go to bed and when you wake up, most of these apps will show you how that trends over time, like your wake times, so they can keep you honest. So that's why I look at it, keep you honest. Can show you how many steps you do a day. Even a simple Fitbit can do that. And that's a good thing to look at for just general movement is step counts. You don't need to track how many miles you ran and what output was on your bike and all that crap, unless you really think it's important to you. And also they track stress levels. It may not be 100% accurate on a given point in time, but the trending day to day of what your stress looks like from day to day, or you're more stressed on certain days, and then you maybe can figure out why you're stressed and either don't do that thing or don't see that person or whatever.
And so it's a tool, it's not gospel.
Or calorie, how much, and it may not be 100% accurate, but trends in how many calories you burn a day can help a health coach if you're on a weight loss journey.
Totally. It's good little examples here of why they are really useful and why sometimes they're too far.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you want to close out with as we finish up here? I think this is really wide ranging and thank you for coming on.
Yeah, just something that's been coming up more and more the recent weeks and months, looking at the product releases from companies and whatnot. Just I've been having conversations with people about what is going to look like the landscape 5 years from now. And I'm of the opinion, I may be wrong, I'll probably be wrong, but I just have to wonder if some of the companies that have one product in their lineup, like Orin Whoop will still be around. They'll either have done an IPO and vaporized, or somebody will buy them and shit can the product. Often happens. Just because the cost to keep manufacturing devices and support your users is very expensive. What it costs in Amazon cloud for all the data you're storing, gigabytes. and stuff. And so I just wonder if the big companies that have multiple product families like Apple, Garmin, I mean, realize Garmin does aeronautical is how they started. That's why they're in Kansas. Their head office.
Didn't know that.
They have freight hauling, tracking freight. They have substations, like electrical substation. They got all kinds of stuff. Diving watches, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And so there'll be some big players. And if Google stays in it, those are the big companies that'll probably be around. These other companies may still be out there, but they may have a diminishing portion of wearables, like Wearable, Polar, soon to Koros even, which is a really new startup. But it'll be interesting to see if that plays out. The other thing you see is that I think people will become less tolerant for having things on their body that necessarily might be, you'll see maybe an increased trend in some of the wearable companies like Oxywear and Born or sensors that might actually be under the skin. They can actually track metabolite, variability, stress. Like people inject in their hand to open doors and pay for things. Maybe they'll have things like that. I would do it. Or it's an inner ear sensor they stick way in your inner ear and it just stays there and gets powered by your body and your movement and metabolites in your body that can power it. So I think you might see more of that kind of stuff, or passive things in the home, like the new withing thing in your toilet, or it might be just sensors that are scattered around your house, your office, your car, that are constantly testing metabolites from your breath, like a toothbrush, the mirror. You can actually do HRV and heart rate from that, your scales, just more transient devices that then hub together into aggregated platforms like Profina or something where you truly control Web3, and then you allocate it out to the brokers that wanted these cool apps for you to take advantage of.
So you touched on just a few things: consolidation, commodification of devices, passive tracking, skin versus wearable, implant versus not, control of data.
And then data control, because you don't know what these big companies do with the data. We could talk about something, and sure enough, you'll see an ad on some site right after about it. I guarantee it. So we don't have a lot of control over our data, but Profina, which is started by a guy from Finland who's been living in the US for a while, you get a piece of your own corner within Amazon Web Services, and you can upload your data to that. And then if you want to take advantage of some cool app, you can tell them what data points they get and how often they get it. And you totally control it. And then you can pull it back at any time.
It's like an integration, but you control the data instead of it sitting with Amazon or Garmin or another company. And then
it's in your little part of the world.
The little data cloud for
virtual world. Yeah.
So you see that one coming down, data control. I hope so. I think privacy and social comfort is a big part of health, actually. And I think a lot of the reason people are stressed is because they actually feel like they don't have any privacy and no control over their data, and they could be canceled or just they don't know what's coming down the pipe. So
yeah, the privacy ship has sailed.
Oh, that ship is in, I don't want to say in China literally, but it might be in Russia, North Korea, and Washington, D.C. I don't know where it is, but that ship has sailed. I don't know if you can call it back. Chuck Hazzard, thank you so much. It's been all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I just say, unless you become a Luddite.
Yeah, I've thought about it, but here I am with all my devices. Thanks so much for coming on. You're the man in wearables. You're the man generally. So thank you again.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. All right, folks. Hope you loved that conversation with Chuck Hazzard. Learned something about wearables, the future of measurement, and really the future of health in our country. As always, if you can rate, review, and send to a friend, that really helps me get my word out and help me complete this mission of making our country healthier and making health simple. Until next time, see you on Green Pill.